They called it the union of the century, a fairy tale marriage between the unrivaled beauty of London society, Lady Ariana Winslow, and the devastatingly handsome Duke of Ashbury. The press was in a frenzy. The Queen herself had sent a gift. But 3 hours before she was to walk down the aisle of St. George's, Hanover Square, Ariana didn't find a love letter. She found a ledger, a single leather-bound book that proved her entire romance was a lie orchestrated to steal her inheritance and erase her existence. What she did next wasn't just revenge. It was a masterclass in survival. She didn't cancel the wedding. She put on her veil, dried her tears, and prepared to destroy him in front of God and all of England. This is the story of the bride who didn't run. The morning of June 14th, 1888, broke over London with a heat that promised to be oppressive. In the Winslow mansion on Grosvenor Square, the air was thick with the scent of lilies and the manic energy of a household preparing for a ducal wedding. Lady Ariana Winslow stood before a full-length mirror, her reflection obscured by layers of silk and Brussels lace. She was 22, possessing the kind of sharp, striking features that had made her the diamond of the season 2 years prior. But today her hands were trembling. "You are the luckiest woman in England, Addie," her cousin Beatrice cooed, adjusting the pearl pins in Ariana's dark hair. "Arthur loves you to distraction. And a duke? It's what your father always wanted." Ariana forced a smile. Arthur Pendleton, the Duke of Ashbury, was indeed the catch of the season. Charming, wealthy, and seemingly devoted, he had courted her with a persistence that had worn down even her initial skepticism. But there was a knot in her stomach that had nothing to do with bridal nerves. "I need a moment, Beatrice," Ariana said, her voice tight. "Alone? Please." Beatrice hesitated, but nodded, slipping out of the room. The moment the door clicked shut, Ariana didn't pray. She ran. She gathered the heavy skirts of her wedding gown and slipped down the servants' staircase. She needed to see Arthur. He had promised to stop by early to deliver a gift for her father, and she had seen his carriage arrive minutes ago. She wanted to break tradition to see him before the ceremony, just to quell the rising panic in her chest. She reached the library door, which was slightly ajar. She raised her hand to knock, but a voice stopped her. It was a voice she knew intimately. Arthur's baritone, but stripped of its usual warmth. It was cold, transactional. "The papers are drawn up, Silas. The moment the vows are exchanged, her assets transfer to the marital estate. Under the new Married Women's Property Act, she retains rights, yes, but not if she is declared incompetent." Ariana froze. Silas was her family's solicitor, a man she had known since childhood. "It is risky, Your Grace," Silas's reedy voice replied. "Lady Ariana is sharp. If she suspects nothing." Arthur laughed, the sound cruel and unfamiliar. "She thinks this is a love match. The poor girl is so starved for affection, she ignored every red flag. Once we have the signature on the register, Dr. Halloway creates the medical file. Hysteria, prone to fits. We ship her to the sanitarium in Cornwall by sunset. I get the Winslow shipping fortune to cover my debts at Tattersall's. You get your cut, and I am finally free of that suffocating woman." Ariana stopped breathing. The world tilted on its axis. The man she loved, the man she was marrying in 3 hours, wasn't just cheating on her. He was planning to bury her alive. He intended to use the vows to strip her of her legal rights and lock her away in an asylum so he could plunder her inheritance to pay off gambling debts. She pressed her hand over her mouth to stifle a scream. The betrayal was so absolute, so physical, it felt like a knife twisting in her ribs. Every kind word, every bouquet of roses, every lingering touch, it was all a calculation. She was livestock to him, a cash cow to be slaughtered. She should burst in. She should scream. She should run to her father. But her father was half-deaf and desperate for this match. He would likely think she was getting cold feet. Or worse, Silas would spin it as the hysteria they were already planning to diagnose her with. If she panicked now, she played right into their hands. Ariana backed away from the door, her satin shoes silent on the plush carpet. She retreated up the stairs, her mind racing faster than her heart. She reached her bedroom and locked the door. She looked at the reflection in the mirror again. The trembling had stopped. The fear had evaporated, replaced by a cold, crystalline rage. They wanted a show, she would give them one. She went to her writing desk and pulled out a hidden compartment where she kept her private correspondence. She found the name she needed. Thomas Calloway. He was the son of a disgraced merchant, a man who had clawed his way up to become the most feared investigative journalist in London. He was also the man Ariana had loved 3 years ago, the man she had rejected because her duty to her family demanded a title. She grabbed a quill, dipping it furiously into the ink. She didn't write a letter. She wrote a summons. Thomas. You once said if I ever needed to burn the world down, you would bring the matches. Meet me at the vestry of St. George's in 1 hour. Bring a witness, and bring the file you have on the Duke of Ashbury. A. She rang the bell for her maid. When the girl entered, Ariana was standing tall, her eyes dry and hard as diamonds. Maggie, Ariana said, go to the stables. Have the groom deliver this note immediately. Then come back. I need you to help me fix my veil. I have a wedding to attend. St. George's, Hanover Square, was already filling with the cream of British society. The pews were a sea of velvet and silk filled with whispers about the glorious match. Outside, the crowds cheered as carriages deposited lords and ladies. Inside the small, dusty vestry at the back of the church, however, the atmosphere was funereal. Ariana stood by the window watching the guests arrive. She was fully dressed in her bridal regalia, a vision in white, but her face was pale. The door creaked open. Ariana turned to see a tall man in a slightly rumpled tweed suit that looked out of place among the mourning coats. He had unruly dark hair and eyes that were far too intelligent for polite society. Thomas, she breathed. Thomas Calloway looked at her, his expression unreadable. You look like a Queen Ariana, or a sacrifice. Both, she said. Did you bring it? Thomas reached into his coat and pulled out a thick envelope. I've been tracking Ashbury's debts for months for the Gazette. The man is destitute. He owes £30,000 to the worst sort of lenders in the East End. But Ariana, why am I here? You're marrying him in an hour. He plans to commit me, Ariana said, her voice flat. Tonight, after the vows. He's conspiring with my solicitor to have me declared insane so he can take control of the Winslow shipping lines. Thomas went still. The cynical journalist vanished, replaced by a man radiating dangerous intent. I will kill him. No, Ariana said sharply. If you kill him, he becomes a martyr, and I become the grieving widow of a tragedy. I don't want him dead, Thomas. I want him ruined. I want him stripped of everything just as he planned to strip me. She stepped closer to him, the scent of her perfume, jasmine and steel filling the small room. I cannot cancel the wedding, she explained rapidly. My father has already signed the preliminary contracts. If I walk away, the breach of promise suit will bankrupt us, and Silas will testify against my stability. I need a legal loophole. I need a way to walk out of this church with my fortune intact, and Arthur destroyed. Thomas opened the envelope and spread the papers on the small table. Arthur has a secret, he murmured, scanning the documents. A big one. He's not the rightful duke. Ariana's eyes widened. What? His uncle died in Italy 5 years ago. Arthur claimed the title because the uncle was presumed childless. But I found a marriage certificate in Florence and a birth certificate. There is a legitimate heir, a boy 6 years old living in poverty in Naples. Ariana stared at the papers. If this comes out, he loses the title. He loses the estates. He becomes Mr. Arthur Pendleton, a debtor with no prospects. Thomas looked up. But we can't prove it in an hour. We need time to get the Italian authorities to verify this. I don't need to prove it to the world yet, Ariana said, a plan forming in her mind. I just need to prove it to him. She looked at the clock on the wall. 40 minutes until the organ music started. Thomas, I need you to do something impossible. Name it. I need you to take my place. He blinked. I beg your pardon. Not at the altar. She clarified, her eyes gleaming. I need you to be the one who objects, but not with a shout. I need you to intercept the Archbishop. The Archbishop of Canterbury is officiating, Thomas said dryly. He's not exactly a man one chats up in the hallway. He is if you have proof of bigamy, Ariana said, or rather proof that the groom is soliciting a fraudulent marriage. If Arthur isn't the Duke, he signed the marriage license under a false name. That makes the contract void. Ariana, Thomas said softly, reaching out to take her gloved hand. If we do this, there is no going back. The scandal will mark you. You will be the woman who destroyed a duke on her wedding day. Ariana looked down at her hand in his. She remembered why she had loved him. He didn't see a title. He saw her. Better a scandal than a cage, she whispered. But I have a better idea, one that hurts him more. She leaned in and whispered the plan to Thomas. As he listened, a slow shark-like grin spread across his face. You are terrifying, Lady Ariana. I learned from the best, she said, smoothing her dress. Now go, and Thomas. He paused at the door. Don't miss the show. Ariana turned back to the mirror. She pinched her cheeks to bring the color back. She adjusted her veil to cover her eyes. She looked like the perfect demure Victorian bride. Arthur thought he was walking a lamb to the slaughter. He had no idea he was marrying a wolf. The bells began to toll. It was time. The organ music swelled a thunderous rendition of Wagner's bridal chorus that vibrated through the floorboards of the church. The heavy oak doors swung open, and the congregation stood as one. Ariana took her father's arm. Lord Winslow was beaming oblivious to the fact that he was walking his only daughter toward a precipice. You look beautiful, my dear, he whispered, patting her hand. Your mother would be so proud, a duchess. Yes, father. Ariana murmured, her eyes fixed on the distant altar. A duchess. The aisle seemed to stretch for miles. On either side, the faces of London's elite blurred into a kaleidoscope of judgment and envy. She saw the feather-trimmed hats of the gossip-mongers, the stiff collars of the politicians. They were all witnesses. That was good. She needed witnesses. At the end of the nave stood Arthur. He looked every inch the fairy tale prince in his military dress uniform, The sash of the Order of the Garter slashed across his chest. He watched her approach with a look of proprietary satisfaction. It was the look a collector gives a rare painting he has just acquired for a bargain price. As she reached the altar, Arthur stepped forward to take her hand. His grip was firm, almost painful. He leaned in ostensibly to kiss her cheek, but his whisper was a hiss of cold air against her ear. "You're trembling, Ariana. Don't embarrass me. And don't worry about the reception. Dr. Halloway will be waiting in the vestry immediately after the service to give you a sedative. You look unstable." It was beginning. He was planting the seeds of her madness before the ring was even on her finger. Ariana pulled back, looking him in the eye. "I am perfectly well, Arthur. In fact, I have never seen things so clearly." Arthur frowned, a flicker of unease marring his perfect features. But he turned back to the Archbishop of Canterbury, who stood ready with the open Bible. The service began. The Archbishop's voice was a sonorous drone reciting the ancient liturgy. Ariana stood rigid, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She could feel Thomas's presence somewhere in the shadows of the side nave, waiting for the signal. "Dearly beloved," the Archbishop intoned, "we are gathered together here in the sight of God." Arthur squeezed her hand. He was confident. He thought he had won. "Into which holy estate these two persons present come now to be joined." The Archbishop paused, looking out over the congregation. "Therefore, if any man can show any just cause why they may not lawfully be joined together, let him now speak, or else hereafter forever hold his peace." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the rustling of silk and the clearing of throats. It was the moment of ritual silence, never meant to be broken. Arthur relaxed. He let out a breath. "I can—" A voice rang out. It wasn't a man in the pews. It wasn't Thomas. It was the bride. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. It sounded like a physical blow. Lady Ariana Winslow pulled her hand from Arthur's grip, as if she had been burned. Arthur's head snapped toward her, his eyes wide with shock. "Ariana, what are you doing? Sit down. You are having a spell." "I am not having a spell." "Arthur." Ariana's voice was clear, projected perfectly to the back of the church. She turned to face the congregation, her veil thrown back, her face fierce and unyielding. "I am objecting to this union." "This is madness," Arthur hissed, reaching for her arm. "Father, forgive her, she is unwell. Silas, get the doctor." "Do not touch me," Ariana shouted the command, cracking like a whip. She reached into her bodice and pulled out the folded pages Thomas had given her, the copies of the ledger and the asylum committal forms. She held them up. "This man who calls himself the Duke of Ashbury is a fraud. But worse than that, he is a monster." "She is hysterical," Arthur shouted, his composure shattering. He looked frantically at the guests. "She has been suffering from delusions for weeks. Dr. Halloway is here to treat her. Is that why you signed these papers, Arthur?" Ariana challenged, waving the documents. "Admission papers for the Cornwall Sanatorium for Women. Signed by you and my solicitor, Silas Thorne, dated for today. Reason for admission: incompetence due to female hysteria. Transfer of assets to husband immediate." The crowd erupted. Fans snapped shut. Monocles dropped. Lord Winslow, red-faced and confused, stepped forward. "Ariana, what is this? He intended to lock me away." "Father," Ariana said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "He planned to marry me, take the shipping fortune and bury me in a cell so he could pay his gambling debts." "Lies," Arthur roared, lunging for her. "Stop!" The command boomed from the side of the altar. Thomas Calloway stepped out from the shadows of the vestry, but he wasn't alone. Flanking him were two uniformed officers from Scotland Yard and a severe-looking man in a black suit, Inspector Aberline. Arthur froze. Thomas walked to the center of the altar, standing beside Ariana. He didn't look like a rumpled journalist anymore. He looked like an executioner. "We have the original ledger, Your Grace," Thomas said, inflecting the title with dripping sarcasm. "Recovered from your study this morning while you were dressing. It details £30,000 in debt. It also details a payment of £5,000 to Dr. Halloway for a false diagnosis." Arthur's face went the color of old ash. He looked for Silas Thorne in the front pew, but the solicitor's seat was empty. The rat had fled the sinking ship. "This is preposterous," Arthur stammered, trying to regain his haughty demeanor. "I am a peer of the realm. You cannot accuse me on the word of a hysterical woman and a gutter journalist. I am the Duke of Ashbury." Ariana looked at Thomas. This was the moment. The coup de grace. "That," Ariana said softly, "is the biggest lie of all." The church was in pandemonium, but around the altar, a strange, deadly calm had settled. The Archbishop looked between Arthur and the police, clutching his Bible as if it could ward off the scandal. Thomas reached into his jacket pocket and produced the second document, the one from Italy. "Inspector Aberline," Thomas said, handing the paper to the police officer. "If you would be so kind." Inspector Aberline, a man known for his relentless pursuit of truth in the grim streets of Whitechapel, adjusted his spectacles. He read the document aloud, his voice dry and factual. "Certificate of marriage between Lord Henry Pendleton and Sophia Rossi Florence, 1880. Certificate of live birth, distinct male, Giacomo Pendleton, Naples, 1882. The inspector looked up. "Lord Henry was your uncle, was he not, sir?" "The previous Duke." Arthur was shaking now, a fine tremor running through his hands. "My uncle died childless. He was a bachelor." "He was a widower," Thomas corrected, "and he left a son, a legitimate son, which means, Mr. Pendleton, that the title of Duke belongs to a 6-year-old boy living in an orphanage in Naples. You have known this for 3 years. We found the blackmail letters from your uncle's former valet in your safe." The revelation swept through the church like a tidal wave. Arthur wasn't just a scoundrel. He was a usurper. He wasn't a duke. He was nothing. "You have been impersonating a peer, soliciting money under false pretenses, and conspiring to kidnap and imprison a British heiress," Inspector Aberline said, signaling his men. "Arthur Pendleton, you are under arrest." Arthur looked at Ariana. The mask was completely gone now. There was no charm, no arrogance, only the raw, ugly face of a trapped animal. "I did it for the family," he snarled at her. "To keep the estate together. That boy is a peasant. He can't be a duke, and you ungrateful witch. I would have given you a title. You would have given me a grave," Ariana replied coldly. The officers moved in, grabbing Arthur by the arms. He struggled, shouting obscenities that would make a sailor blush, stripping away the last remnants of his gentlemanly facade. As they dragged him down the aisle, the same aisle he had intended to walk down in triumph, the congregation parted like the Red Sea, shrinking away from him in disgust. Ariana watched him go. She didn't look away until the heavy doors slammed shut behind him. Then she turned to the stunned Archbishop. "I apologize for the disruption, Your Grace," she said, smoothing her skirts, "but I believe the ceremony is cancelled." She walked over to Thomas, who was watching her with an expression of awe. "You didn't just ruin him," Thomas whispered. "You obliterated him." "He obliterated himself," Ariana said. She felt light, untethered. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her exhausted but exhilaratingly free. She turned to her father. Lord Winslow was sitting in the pew, head in his hands. He looked old and defeated. "Father," Ariana said gently. He looked up, tears in his eyes. "I nearly sold you to him, Addie. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." "I know you didn't," she said, taking his hand. "But from now on, I make my own decisions. Is that understood?" Lord Winslow nodded vigorously. "Anything you say." Ariana turned back to the crowd. They were watching her, waiting to see what the jilted bride would do. Would she faint? Would she cry? Ariana Winslow did neither. She walked to the center of the nave. "My lords, ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice steady. "I thank you for your attendance. There will be no wedding feast today. However, the food has already been prepared. I have instructed the staff to deliver the banquet to the East End orphanages and the workhouses on Fleet Street." A murmur of surprise went through the room. "Furthermore," she continued, "I will be departing for Naples in the morning, not on a honeymoon, but on a rescue mission. I intend to find the true Duke of Ashbury, bring him home, and ensure he is raised with the dignity his title demands. The Winslow shipping line will act as his guarantors until he comes of age." She wasn't just a victim surviving a plot. She was positioning herself as the kingmaker. She was taking control of the very dukedom that tried to crush her. She looked at Thomas. "Mr. Calloway, I believe I will need a guide in Italy. Someone who speaks the language and knows how to find lost things." Thomas smiled, a genuine, crooked smile that made her heart skip a beat, a feeling she hadn't felt in 3 years. "I would be honored, Lady Ariana." Ariana took his arm. "Then let us go. We have a boat to catch." Together they walked down the aisle, not to the wedding march, but to the stunned silence of a society that had just witnessed the birth of a legend. Ariana Winslow hadn't just dodged a bullet. She had caught it in her teeth and fired it back. As they exited the church into the blinding afternoon sun, the press, alerted by Thomas, was waiting. Flashbulbs popped, capturing the image that would splash across every front page in England the next morning. The lady in white, unbowed, unbroken, leading the charge into a new life. The heat in Naples was different from London. It was a physical weight, smelling of salt lemon and unwashed bodies. Ariana stood on the dock, her pristine traveling suit already dusted with the grime of the port, watching the chaos of the Italian coast. "It's not too late to go back to the hotel," Thomas said, shielding his eyes from the glare. "The Spagnoli Quarter is no place for a lady." Ariana adjusted her parasol, her jaw set. "I didn't come this far to be a tourist, Thomas. We have an address. We go." It had been a week since the wedding that wasn't. A week of scandal that had crossed the channel with them. Ariana had left her father to manage the fallout in London while she chased a ghost. They were looking for the Ospedale degli Incurabili, a grim institution for the destitute, where the records indicated young Giacomo had been left after his mother's death. The journey into the heart of Naples was a descent into a labyrinth. Narrow streets hung with laundry blocked the sun. They moved through crowds that stared openly at Ariana's fine clothes. Thomas kept a hand on the revolver concealed in his coat pocket, his body a constant shield between her and the jostling masses. When they finally found the orphanage, it was a crumbling stone fortress that smelled of mildew and old soup. The Mother Superior, a stern woman with a face carved from granite, looked at Ariana with suspicion. "We have many orphans," the nun said in rapid Italian, which Thomas translated. "Why do you want this one? The boy is difficult. He speaks to no one." "He is family," Ariana said simply. She placed a heavy bag of gold lyre on the table. "And I intend to take him home." The nun's eyes flickered to the gold. Money was the universal language. She led them through dark corridors to a small courtyard. Sitting alone in the dirt, playing with a broken wooden soldier, was a small boy with unruly dark curls and eyes that were the mirror image of the man Ariana had almost married. But unlike Arthur's cold, predatory gaze, this child's eyes were wide and filled with a terrifying hollowness. "Giacomo," Ariana whispered, crouching down, heedless of her silk skirts in the dust. The boy flinched. "We aren't here to hurt you," Thomas said softly, kneeling beside her. "We're here to take you to a place with a garden and horses." Before the boy could respond, a shadow fell over them. "I am afraid," a familiar oily voice sneered, "that the boy is already spoken for." Ariana froze. She stood up slowly and turned. Standing in the archway was Silas Thorne, the solicitor. He looked disheveled, sweating profusely in the Italian heat, but he was flanked by two local roughnecks holding knives. "Silas," Ariana said, her voice dripping with ice. "I assumed you were halfway to Brazil by now." "I have no intention of living as a fugitive," Silas spat. "Arthur was a fool, but he had the right idea. The boy is the key. Whoever controls the Duke controls the fortune. I have papers here, guardianship papers. The Mother Superior was quite happy to sign them for a fraction of what you offered." Ariana looked at the nun, who crossed herself and looked away in shame. "You can't take him," Thomas said, stepping forward, his hand drifting to his pocket. "I can," Silas sneered. "These gentlemen here will ensure I board the ship to America with the boy, and you two tragically lost in a robbery gone wrong in the bad part of town." The thugs stepped forward, knives glinting. Ariana felt fear cold and sharp. But then she looked at Giacomo. The boy was shaking. He had been abandoned by his father, lost his mother, and now was being traded like cattle. Something in Ariana snapped. It was the same fury that had seized her in the vestry. "Thomas," she said calmly, "do you remember the article you wrote about the corruption in the Neapolitan Port Authority?" Thomas blinked, confused by the non sequitur. "Yes. Did you not mention that the local carabinieri captain was looking for a way to restore his honor after that scandal?" Ariana reached into her reticule. She didn't pull out a weapon. She pulled out a whistle, a silver police whistle she had purchased on Thomas's advice before leaving London. She blew it. The shrill sound echoed off the stone walls, deafening in the small courtyard. Silas laughed. "You think the police come for a whistle in this neighborhood?" "No." Ariana smiled, a dangerous, shark-like smile. "But they do come for the astonishing bounty I posted at the station this morning for the capture of a British fugitive named Silas Thorne." Silas's face went white. From the street outside, the sound of shouting and heavy boots erupted. The gates burst open. Captain Moretti, a man Thomas had indeed interviewed years ago, strode in with 4 armed officers. "Mr. Thorne." The captain grinned, twirling his mustache. "The Lady Winslow told us you might try to visit the boy. You are a very expensive man." The thugs dropped their knives and fled over the wall. Silas Thorne slumped against the archway, defeated. Ariana walked past him, not even sparing him a glance. She went back to the boy. She held out her hand. "Giacomo," she said gently. "My name is Ariana. I am going to take you home." The boy looked at Silas being handcuffed, then at Thomas, and finally at Ariana. Slowly, hesitantly, he reached out his small, dirty hand and placed it in hers. Thomas watched them, his heart aching in his chest. In the grime of a Naples slum, Ariana Winslow looked more regal than she ever had in a ballroom. She had saved herself, and now she was saving the boy. He realized then, with a sinking feeling, that he was falling in love with her all over again. And he realized that a woman like this, a woman who toppled dukes and commanded police captains, was far, far out of his league. The return to London was not a quiet affair. The press dubbed it the return of the Iron Bride. Ariana ignored them all. She had work to do. With Arthur awaiting trial in the Tower of London, and Silas Thorne extradited to face fraud charges, the Duchy of Ashbury was in chaos. The estate was bankrupt, the staff unpaid, and the reputation of the family in tatters. Ariana installed Giacomo, now Lord James Pendleton, the rightful Duke of Ashbury, in the nursery of the Winslow mansion, while the Ashbury estate was made habitable. She petitioned the House of Lords for legal guardianship. Usually this would be impossible for a single woman, but the public sentiment was overwhelmingly on her side. She was the heroine who had saved the peerage from a fraud. The Queen herself granted the petition. Ariana became, for all intents and purposes, the Regent Duchess. 6 months passed. The transformation was absolute. Ariana traded her pastels for sharp, tailored suits in navy and charcoal. She spent her days in meetings with bankers, restructuring the Ashbury debts, using the Winslow shipping logistics to revitalize the Duke's tenant farms. She was ruthless, efficient, and brilliant. But she was also lonely. Thomas had retreated. After they returned from Italy, he had written the exclusive story of the rescue, a piece of journalism that won him awards and job offers from New York to Paris. But he had stopped visiting. He sent polite notes. He claimed to be busy with a new investigation into factory labor laws. Ariana missed him with a physical ache. She missed his dry wit, his comfortable silence, the way he looked at her, not as a commodity, but as a partner. One rainy Tuesday in November, Ariana sat in the library of Ashbury House, the very room where she had discovered Arthur's ledger. It was now her office. "Your Grace," the butler announced. The staff insisted on using the honorific, though she wasn't a duchess. "Mr. Calloway is here." Ariana's heart jumped. "Send him in." Thomas entered. He looked tired. His coat was wet from the rain, and he held his hat in his hands, turning the brim nervously. "Ariana," he nodded. "Or should I say, Lady Guardian?" "Ariana is fine, Thomas. It always has been." She stood up, walking around the massive oak desk. "You haven't come to tea in weeks. James asks about you. He wants to show you his pony." "I've been preparing," Thomas said, avoiding her eyes. "I've accepted a position with the New York Herald. I leave on Friday." The air left the room. "New York," Ariana repeated. "That is far." "It's for the best," Thomas said, his voice rough. "Look at you, Ariana. You are running one of the greatest estates in England. You are dining with cabinet ministers. You have restored a dynasty." "I did what I had to do," she said, stepping closer. "You did," he agreed. "And you are magnificent. But I am just a scribbler, Ariana. A merchant's son who got lucky. I don't fit in this world you've built. I helped you burn down the old one, but I don't belong in the palace you've raised from the ashes." "Is that what you think?" Ariana asked, her voice rising. "You think I care about this world, about the ministers and the tea parties?" "You were born to it," Thomas said gently. "I can't be the man who drags you down. The gossip is already starting, Ariana. They say the journalist is hanging around the heiress for a payout. I won't let your reputation be tarnished by me." He turned to the door. "I just came to say goodbye, and to tell you, I am incredibly proud of you." He reached for the doorknob. "Thomas Calloway, if you walk out that door, I will buy the New York Herald and fire you," Ariana threatened. Thomas froze. He turned back, a half smile tugging at his lips. "You would, wouldn't you?" "I would," she said. She crossed the distance between them, ignoring propriety, ignoring the ghosts of the past. "You think I did all this for a title? I did this to be free, Thomas. Free to manage my own money, free to protect a child, and free to love whoever I damn well please." She stood before him, looking up into his dark eyes. "I don't want a duke, Thomas. I tried that. It was a disaster. I want the man who handed me a match when I wanted to burn the world down. I want the man who stood beside me in a slum in Naples." Thomas looked torn, his guard crumbling. "Ariana, I have nothing to offer you. No land, no title." "You have the truth," she whispered, "and you have my heart, which according to my accountants is the only asset I haven't leveraged yet." She took his face in her hands. "Don't go to New York. Stay. Help me raise James. Help me run this estate. Be my partner. Be my equal. Society will eat us alive." Thomas warned, though his hands came up to hold her waist. Ariana smirked, the same dangerous smirk she had worn on the church steps. "Let them try," she said. "I have a ledger on half of them, and you can investigate the other half." Thomas laughed, a sound of pure relief. He lowered his head and kissed her. It wasn't the chaste peck of a Victorian courtship. It was a seal on a new contract, one based on passion, respect, and a shared penchant for causing trouble. 3 years later. November 1891. The rain in London had not changed, but everything else had. Ariana stood by the window of the Ashbury Town Home's study, watching the grey drizzle streak the glass. Behind her, the room was a hive of quiet, intense activity. 3 clerks were sorting through stacks of correspondence, and a junior solicitor was waiting for her signature on a tenant reform bill. She was no longer just Lady Ariana, the jilted bride. In the salons of Mayfair and the back rooms of Parliament, she was known simply as the Regent. Technically, she was the legal guardian of the 9-year-old Duke of Ashbury, Lord James Pendleton, formerly Giacomo. But everyone knew that the Winslow fortune and the Ashbury land were now inextricably linked, creating a power block that terrified the old guard. She had turned the debt-ridden estate into a model of modern efficiency, using her father's shipping logistics to revolutionize how the duchy's agricultural goods reached the market. The board of directors for the Winslow line is stalling on the steamship expansion, Ariana. A voice came from the large oak desk. Ariana turned. Thomas Calloway sat there, his sleeves rolled up, a smudge of ink on his cheek. He didn't look like a duke, nor did he look like the scrappy journalist she had met in a dusty vestry 3 years ago. He looked like the other half of her soul. Over the last 3 years, Thomas had become her unofficial advisor, her strategist, and her constant shadow. He had turned down the job in New York. He had turned down offers to edit the Times. Instead, he used his pen to fight the battles Ariana couldn't fight in the ballroom, when she needed a corrupt councilman exposed. Thomas wrote the exposé. When she needed public sentiment to sway in favor of her orphanage reforms, Thomas spun the narrative. They were a machine, a perfect, terrifying machine. "Let them stall," Ariana said, walking over to the desk. She picked up a silver letter opener, weighing it in her hand. They think because I am a woman, I will tire of the details. They forget that I spent my childhood reading manifests, while other girls practiced needlepoint. Send a telegram to the Liverpool office. Tell them if the board refuses the expansion, I will personally buy their shares at below market value when the quarterly report comes out. Thomas looked up, a grin spreading across his face, that crooked knowing smile that still made her breath hitch. Ruthless. I love it. I learned from the best, she countered softly. The clerks in the corner pretended not to hear. The friendship between Lady Ariana and Mr. Calloway was the worst-kept secret in London. They arrived at the theatre together. They rode in the park together with young James. They argued over politics in public, and rumour had it dined alone in private. But they had never crossed the final line. There was no ring on her finger. Thomas's smile faded slightly as he looked at her. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with the unspoken thing that had hovered between them for 36 months. Ariana. He started, his voice dropping an octave. We need to discuss the invitations for James's birthday ball. The list is finalized, isn't it? It is, Thomas said, standing up. He walked around the desk, stopping inches from her. The clerks, sensing the shift in atmosphere, wisely gathered their papers and scurried out of the room, closing the heavy mahogany doors behind them. The list is fine. Thomas continued, his dark eyes searching hers. But the gossip columns are becoming specific. The Tatler referred to me yesterday as the Duke's shadow. They say I am a fortune hunter, playing the long game. They say you are keeping me as a pet radical to annoy the Tories. Ariana stiffened. I do not care what the Tatler says. I care about the work we are doing. We are building something real, Thomas. James is happy. The tenants are fed. The shipping line is profitable. And what about us? Thomas asked. The question hung in the air, fragile and terrifying. I don't know what you mean, she lied, turning away. Thomas caught her hand, gently but firmly. You do. You know exactly what I mean. We have lived in this limbo for 3 years. I wake up every morning, wanting to be the first person to speak to you, and I go to sleep every night, hating that I have to leave this house. But I cannot stay here as just your advisor. It is not enough. Not anymore. Ariana looked at his hand covering hers. His fingers were stained with ink, the mark of his trade, his lower status, his brilliance. If we marry, Ariana whispered, voicing the fear that had kept her frozen, you become Mr. Ariana Winslow in their eyes. They will say you married me for the money. They will snub you at the clubs. They will try to humiliate you to get to me. I couldn't bear to see that light in your eyes, the one that challenges the world, dimmed by their snobbery. Thomas laughed, a low, rumbling sound of disbelief. He stepped closer, cupping her face in his hands. Ariana, do you really think I care about the opinions of men who inherited their relevance? I have been threatened by gang lords in Naples and corrupt police chiefs in Whitechapel. Do you think a few cold shoulders at the Reform Club will break me? He leaned his forehead against hers. I don't want their respect, he murmured. I want yours. I want to wake up beside you and not have to read about your day in a letter. I want to be the man who stands next to you, not behind you when you take on the world. Ariana closed her eyes, letting the walls she had built around her heart crumble. She had spent so long protecting herself from betrayal, protecting James from the world, that she had forgotten to let herself be protected. I have a ledger, she whispered, a tear slipping down her cheek. A mental ledger of every reason why this is a bad idea, why it's risky, Why, it's scandalous." "Burn the ledger," Thomas commanded softly. Ariana opened her eyes. She saw the fire in his gaze, the same fire that had helped her destroy a false duke and save a child. "Okay," she breathed. "Let's burn it." The Winslow mansion was transformed. The ballroom, usually a cavernous space of cold marble, was alive with the scent of hothouse gardenias and the warmth of 1,000 beeswax candles. The crème de la crème of British society had gathered, drawn by the irresistible gravity of the Winslow-Ashbury power block. In the center of the room, young Lord James Pendleton held court. At 9 years old, he was a handsome boy, possessing the dark Pendleton curls, but none of the cruelty of his deposed cousin. He spoke Italian and English fluently, and under Ariana's tutelage, he could discuss naval history better than most admirals. "He looks like a king," Lord Winslow said, standing by the perimeter, holding a glass of sherry. Ariana's father had aged, but he looked happier than he had in years. The burden of the estate had been lifted from his shoulders by his capable daughter. "He looks like a boy who is loved," Ariana corrected, stepping up beside her father. Lord Winslow looked at his daughter. She was wearing midnight blue velvet, the bodice encrusted with sapphires that caught the candlelight like stars. She wore no tiara, no heavy jewels of the Ashbury collection. She needed no borrowed authority. "You have done well, Addie," her father said, his voice thick with emotion. "I worry, though. You carry so much alone." "I am not alone, father," she said, her eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on a figure near the orchestra. Thomas was speaking with the Prime Minister. It was a sight that would have been impossible 3 years ago, but Thomas Calloway had a way of speaking truth that made even powerful men lean in to listen. He looked up, sensing her gaze across the room. He nodded a microscopic gesture that only she saw. It was time. The orchestra conductor tapped his baton, silencing the strings. The chatter of the room died down, replaced by the rustle of silk as hundreds of guests turned toward the grand staircase where Ariana now stood. She raised a hand. "My lords, ladies, and honored guests," her voice rang out, clear and steady. "Thank you for joining us to celebrate the 9th birthday of the Duke of Ashbury. James represents the future of this house, a future built on truth, not deception." She gestured to James, who waved enthusiastically to the crowd, eliciting fond smiles even from the stiffest dowagers. "But tonight," Ariana continued, her heart hammering a rhythm against her ribs, "I also wish to address the past and the present." She walked down the remaining stairs, the crowd parting for her as she moved toward Thomas. He stepped out of the circle of politicians and met her in the center of the floor. A murmur went through the room. The scandalous journalist and the iron-willed heiress, together, in the center of the ballroom. "For 3 years," Ariana said, her voice projecting to the gallery, "London has speculated about the nature of my partnership with Mr. Calloway. You have called him my shadow. You have called him an opportunist." She saw a few faces in the crowd flush with embarrassment. "You were wrong," she said, a smile playing on her lips. "He is not my shadow. He is my anchor. When I was threatened with imprisonment and ruin, he was the only man in England brave enough to stand with me. When this estate was bankrupt, his mind helped rebuild it." She reached out and took Thomas's hand. He interlaced his fingers with hers, a gesture of intimacy that made the ladies behind their fans gasp. "This morning," Ariana announced, "in a private ceremony at the St. Pancras Registry Office with Lord James as our witness, Mr. Calloway and I were married." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a shockwave. A Winslow heiress, the regent of a duchy, marrying a man who worked for a living. It was unheard of. "I will remain Lady Ariana," she said, her chin lifting, "and my husband will remain Mr. Calloway. We do not need your titles to define who we are. We have defined ourselves." She looked at Thomas, her eyes shining with defiance and joy. "I have spent my life doing what was expected of me. I almost lost my life to what was expected of me. From this day forward, I choose what makes me happy. And he makes me happy." Thomas raised her hand to his lips and kissed it right over the plain gold band that now sat on her finger. "To the bride," Thomas said, his voice rich with pride, "the woman who rewrote the story." For a second, nobody moved. Then from the side of the room, young James began to clap. Then Lord Winslow joined in. Then the Prime Minister. And slowly, like a dam breaking the rest of the room, followed. It wasn't polite applause. It was a thunderous recognition of a power that could not be denied. The orchestra, sensing the moment, swept into a waltz, Strauss's Blue Danube. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Calloway?" Thomas asked, bowing low. "You may, Mr. Calloway," she replied. He swept her into his arms and they spun across the floor. "You realize," Thomas whispered in her ear, as the room blurred into a kaleidoscope of color around them, "that we have just made ourselves the most talked-about couple in history. We will never have a moment's peace." "Let them talk," Ariana laughed, feeling lighter than air. "Let them write their gossip columns and whisper behind their fans. They are just watching the show." "And we?" Thomas asked, pulling her closer. "We," Ariana said, looking up at the man who had helped her burn down her cage, "are the authors." They danced on two partners in a world of their own making. Ariana thought back to that morning in the library, 3 years ago, the leather ledger cold in her hands, her life seemingly over. She had thought it was the end. She had been wrong. It had been the prologue. As the music swelled and the lights of the chandelier sparkled in the sapphires on her dress, Lady Ariana Winslow, now Ariana Calloway, smiled. She had won the game not by playing by their rules, but by breaking the board. And the best part, the story was just beginning. And that is the story of Lady Ariana Winslow, the bride who turned a wedding day tragedy into a triumph of justice and love. She proved that sometimes the worst day of your life is actually the day your real life begins. Ariana didn't just survive. She rewrote the rules of the game. If you enjoyed this story of revenge romance and Victorian power moves, please give this video a like. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you never miss a story. What would you have done if you found that ledger? Would you have run, or would you have walked down that aisle to expose him? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.